And welcome. Tonight is Monday, April 8th, 2019. This is the regular city council meeting for the city of St. Peter. It is 7 o'clock p.m. We'll call the meeting to order. Would all please join in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Everyone should have a copy of the agenda. Are there any changes or corrections to the agenda? If not, is there a motion for approval?
So move, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
All in favor of the agenda as presented, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Agenda is approved. Next, we have the approval of the minutes from our March 25th, 2019 meeting. Those minutes appear on pages 4 and 5. Are there any changes or corrections to those minutes? If not, is there a motion for approval?
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor of the minutes as written, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Those minutes are approved. First up tonight, we have a public hearing, and it is a public hearing for the Pavilion Project Tax Abatement. And Todd, do you want to go over the procedures?
Just quick on the procedures. The mayor conducts the public hearing. The order of the hearing is usually there's a staff presentation and the public's allowed to provide commentary. The commentary per person is limited to 5 minutes. Speakers are supposed to stick to factual evidence. And after all the testimony is provided, generally the mayor would call the hearing closed. And as is the case in most instances, but not all, tonight we have an action item later on your agenda, which is the basis for the hearing. Shannon Sweeney is here from David Brown and Associates to talk us through a little bit about funding through a tax abatement process. So Shannon, I'll turn it over to you.
First, we will call the public hearing for the Pavilion Project Tax Abatement. We'll call it to order at 7:03 p.m. on Monday, April 8th, 2019. Shannon.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor and members of the council, in your packet was a resolution that provides for the adoption of a tax abatement for the purpose of funding the Pavilion project that would be located in Minnesota Square Park. As you may recall, when we went through the planning process for the project, we discussed, probably the most efficient alternatives for financing a portion of the project costs associated with that project. We had recommended the use of general obligation tax abatement bonds, which are supported by a tax levy that's spread over the entire community. Through part of this process for adopting a tax abatement that authorizes the levy for the bond issue, we are required to identify properties that have some form of benefit associated with the project. So you may have noticed that the resolution included a list of parcel ID numbers, and those were residential properties located in the vicinity of the Minnesota Square Park. Now, recognize that by identifying those properties, we're not picking on them or identifying them for some special levy against just those properties. We're merely identifying properties within the community that drive some benefit associated to the project, and we have to make that determination that they pay sufficient tax that equates to the abatement levy we're intending to make. But as we've discussed in the past, and I'll remind you tonight, such a levy, if it's adopted, is spread against all taxpayers of the community in a similar manner as other levies that are made by the community. So if you had questions about that parcel list, that's the reason why statute requires us to identify folks that receive some form of benefit associated with the project. Under abatement law, you have to have a specific purpose for being able to issue tax abatement bonds, and construction of public facilities is one of those purposes authorized under Minnesota statute, and that's what we mostly point to through this process as being our authority for adopting the abatement levy that is proposed. We're only identifying the principal on the bond issue as the abatement levy. The interest would also be levied, and we'll talk about that when we get to that particular topic. But under Minnesota statute, we do have a cap on the amount that we can call a tax abatement levy in any year, and that's equal to the greater of $200,000 or 10% of the city's net tax capacity. And since we have limited capacity, we're only required to identify the principal on the bond issue as the abatement levy, and that's what we've done in this process. So if you choose to act on the enclosed resolution, we're adopting an abatement levy that would span for a period of 20 years, which would be the same term as the proposed bond issue or the principal amortization on the proposed bond issue. And again, we'd be using a portion of our abatement capacity for the pavilion project and the financing that's used to pay for a portion of that cost. We're not picking on individual properties, as I mentioned previously. We're simply following a statutory process for making a tax levy to support this project. So, more than happy to answer questions from the council or public with regard to the proposed action. So,
All right. Shannon will be back, and so if you have questions then also, we can take care of them then. Shannon, you're going to be coming up here real quick. You can probably just stay right there. You don't have to leave unless we have somebody that would like to speak. Does the council have any questions at this point? Steve?
You mentioned that you said it's either the greater of 10% of our tax capacity
yep.
or 200,000. So what would that 10% equate to? And are we using any of those, are we using this in any other debt that the city has currently?
We do have one tax abatement obligation with the Mankato Clinic facility. Do we also have one associated with the Mayo Health facility? Todd may have to remind me of that.
Yeah, the only abatement one that we have right now is actually with the Mayo facility. Mankato Clinic is a tax increment finance district. Both of those should roll off within the next few years. Just looking quick at the 10% number that you asked.
A little over $500,000.
Exactly, about
Yep.
530 million, or 530,000, sorry, 530,000.
Would be our limit on how much we can abate annually.
Okay,
So
right.
we're,
So you're not at half.
no, you're
okay.
at about 20%.
All right, so it's the dollar figure that you're referencing would be the principal payment every year?
Correct.
Okay, I got it. All right, thank you.
Any questions right now? Jerry?
When you'll be going out for bids on these?
We can cover that in the next section, but the bond issue, we have a schedule in your packet that
We do.
includes May 13th would be when we'd receive bids on the bonds.
How
If you-
does the interest rate look at this time?
We're projecting about, and I think this is a bit conservative today, 3.2%.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, a lot of this is covered and will be covered later when we have two resolutions coming up later. Anybody else? Questions at this point? If not, is there anyone in the audience that would like to make any public comments concerning this public hearing? If not, we will close the public hearing for the, let me get the exact name of it here, so we know. What's that? The public hearing for, where is that? For the Pavilion Project tax abatement. Maybe I put my glasses on, it would help. We will close that public hearing at 7:09 PM on Monday, April 8th, 2019. Thank you, Shannon.
You're
And like I
welcome.
say, you can stay right there since there's no, because the next thing we have is the consent agenda. No, excuse me, next thing we have is visitors. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak to the council on any agenda item? Seeing no one. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak to the council on any matter whatsoever? Seeing no one, we will move to the consent agenda. The consent agenda begins in detail on page 8 and concludes with the resolution on pages 23 and 24, and includes following license applications for tree worker license, and these are all from May 1st, 2019 to April 30th, 2020. For Construction and Tree Services LLC, to Morishings Tree Service Inc., Perfection Landscaping and Patios, to Tool Time Handyman, and to Wendroth Tree and Stump Removal. We have a request for a temporary on-sale beer license to the St. Peter Softball Association for 1401 Nicollet Avenue from May 1st, 2019 to July 29th, 2019. We have a request for a temporary soft drink license to the St. Peter Softball Association again for those same dates and at 1401 Nicollet Avenue. Next, we have some unclaimed bicycles that were going to be donated to Key City Bike Project, and there are 20 items listed under item 3. Next, we have seasonal employee appointments with their wages, and there are 39 of them, so I'm not going to read through all of those. And the last item is the regular schedule of disbursements for March 21st, 2019 through April 3rd, 2019. Are there any questions or comments on the consent agenda? Steve?
I guess this would be addressed to either Mr. Moulton or Mr. Prafke, but could you tell me what, I mean, I understand most of these positions, what do the stormwater laborers do?
Why don't you come on up, Pete?
They do a variety of things. They take care of a lot of your right-of-way, stormwater basins. We mow all of those and maintain those to MPCA standards, but mostly right-of-way.
Okay,
Then they also assist other groups within our public works facility.
okay. Mr. Mayor, can I ask one more question?
You sure can, Steve.
When you look at the demographics of all of these people, are they mainly young folks that are coming back from school, or who are they?
We have a variety of applicants. We have seniors, we have high school kids, we have college kids, a variety of teachers that work. Their day job is teaching, and then when they're done teaching, they come and work for us and for a couple of months to supplement their income.
I heard a rumor that our mayor had applied, but you wouldn't accept him.
You can't, Steve, you can't work for the city and...
Oh,
elect
that's
as-
it.
So,
Okay.
yeah, so at the end of the year, I will be applying for...
Okay,
So,
all right.
Anyway,
Thanks, Pete.
any other questions, comments? If not, the resolution for the consent agenda, approval of consent agenda appears on pages 23 and 24. Is there a motion for approval?
So moved.
Second.
Any other questions or comments? Call the roll, please, Barb.
Councilmember Grant.
Aye.
Councilmember Paris.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Councilmember Carlin.
Aye.
Mayor Zeman.
Aye.
Councilmember Cornish.
Aye.
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
Aye.
Consent agenda is approved. Next, we have unfinished business, which there is none, so we will move to new business, and we will have Mr. Sweeney here again to tell us about the Pavilion Project tax abatement.
Thank you, Mayor. Members of the council, in your packet, there's a resolution providing the property tax levy. It's a tax abatement levy and would be recorded as such to pay principal and ultimately you'd also be levying interest on the proposed bonds that would be issued for the Pavilion project. Your next action on the agenda is, initiating that process for a competitive sale to issue those bonds. But ultimately, we're looking at a debt service payment of about $92,000 per year that would be levied in property tax over a 20-year term. We ran some tax impact projections previously. They're a tad conservative because we based it on a $98,000 annual debt service levy, and we should be beneath that. But ultimately, that's what's being proposed. And this resolution makes the findings required under statute. We're building public facilities, which is authorized in abatement law. We're doing this for a 20-year term commencing next year. Will be the first year of the levy. Levy will pay 100% of the principal on the bonds up to a maximum of $1.4 million. At this point, we've structured a bond issue at $1,350,000 to pay project costs. And we've identified the parcels that receive some benefit associated with the project. Happy to answer questions on the proposed tax abatement resolution that's before you.
Okay. Questions now? Roger?
On the last slide, we just saw where it's the impact. This is annual, correct? To that person?
That's
just
correct.
to clarify.
Yep.
Okay.
And again, as Shannon said, this is a little bit conservative. It's a little bit higher amount to be financed and a little bit higher interest rate than we hope will be in place, but that's generally how we do these for you. We try and be conservative.
It hits the tax rate pretty hard.
It does. Again, that's driven to a large extent based on the amount of LGA that you receive and how dependent you are on LGA. And your general fund levy is relatively small because of that, at least relative to your entire general fund budget.
Right.
Yeah.
Also characterize your tax rate, meaning your overall levy is relatively low in comparison to a lot of communities. So it is going to see impact a little bit easier from a levy. Anything that's associated with a tax levy, you're going to feel the impact more so.
We should have you there for our conversations when we talk about that. We always hear, our taxes are really high in the city. That the cost of living is high in the city, right? So when you say that, that brings up those other thoughts.
Understood.
Your auditor does a good job of giving you some comparative analysis to other communities throughout the state, at least from a population perspective. So that's always great data for you to see as well. Yeah.
Ed?
Again, on this abatement property, what does that look, this list here?
All it is by statute, we have to identify properties that receive some benefit associated with the project, and those properties have to pay sufficient tax to equal the abatement levy. We're not levying against those properties only, we're levying against the entire community. We're just required to identify properties that receive some benefit associated with the project.
And how do we figure our properties benefit from this project?
They're located in close proximity to Minnesota Square Park, and they're residential.
Okay.
If
One-
you want, we could arbitrarily pick other residential properties in the community. We focused on an area immediately around the park.
One
Let's
other
get-
question.
yeah,
I
go
got.
ahead, Ed.
If, let's say, we get a large donation from somebody, does this go off that payment for the year? Does it go off go into an account until we can pay this loan off, or how does that work when it's bonded?
So there are a couple different options with that. So after the bonding takes place, and really frankly after tonight, if we would receive, let's say we would receive a $200,000 donation a month from now, use that as an example, those dollars would be put into a restricted fund that goes towards helping pay this. From a staff perspective, we'd recommend to you whether you used it immediately or whether you didn't use it immediately. It's also important to note, as Shannon indicated, that the call date or the earliest payment date you could use is, forgive me, I don't remember the date.
Well, it's February 1st to 26th, but you would have the ability to cancel the abatement levy. If you have sufficient funds in any calendar year, you'll have to, the resolution you'll pass when you issue the bonds will require you to make an abatement levy. So in September, you'll set the levy. If you find yourself in a position when you certify your levy in December that you have sufficient funds through donations to make that year's debt service payment, you could choose to cancel that levy. So,
Shannon, could we choose to cancel a portion of it? So let's say we
Sure.
take that $200,000 and for 10 years, $20,000,
yes,
we take that off.
yes,
Yep.
that's correct. So donations can still have immediate impact if however you choose to use them for the project.
Ed, does that answer?
Kind of.
Okay. Well, we're happy to answer. Ask again.
Well, it'll go into an account, so we can basically use it
Yep.
to
Those
make the payments.
any donated funds we get go into a restricted account.
Okay.
And so whether they're used for this purpose, they would essentially have to be if that's the nature of the donation that's provided.
Yeah, when you say for this purpose, there is no other purpose they're going to be used for.
Right.
Yep. This is it. Roger, you had another question?
Forgot it.
Well, good.
It was there, but now it's gone.
Wait till you get a little older, Roger. Any other things to add, Shannon, or any other questions from the council on this first part of this?
You got it.
Yep, came back to you.
We had pursued state funds for some of this, and I believe we were going to keep pursuing again this next year. That would be similar to what Ed is talking about. Those funds would go into a restricted fund if the state was to give us more funds towards this.
If it was towards this, that's correct.
Yep.
Okay.
But if the state increases LGA,
No.
no. I mean, it could, but it probably, not going to be designated for this, but it could.
Right.
Is there any more applications out for funding for this thing?
So I did make requests, as the council discussed through the bonding bill, but we are not in the current bonding bill. I think frankly, folks, your chances of receiving additional funds, whether it's in bonding bill or through legacy funding, as the $196,000 or $200,000 that you received, is pretty small. We were very fortunate to receive that $200,000.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Any other questions? Excuse me. If not, the resolution approving the property tax abatement for certain properties located in the city of St. Peter appears on pages 28 and 29. Is there a motion for approval?
So move, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
Any other questions or comments now? Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Paris,
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson,
Nay.
Councilmember Garland,
Aye.
Mayor Zinnik.
Aye.
Councilmember Colony.
Aye.
Councilmember Pfeiffer,
Aye.
Councilmember Graham.
Aye.
Resolution is approved with one nay. Next, we have the Pavilion Project, the competitive sale of bonds. Shannon.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor and members of the council, in your packet was information pertaining to our recommendations associated with the financing of the balance of the project costs associated with the pavilion facility. We have state grants, donations, cash contributions from general fund that are being applied to this project currently in the amount of about $403,500. We're looking to finance an additional $1,350,000 of project costs, and we've recommended the issuance of general obligation tax abatement bonds as the most efficient means for financing the balance. We have adopted an abatement resolution, you just took action on that, that provides the mechanism or the tax levy associated with the proposed bond issue. As we've discussed, we're intending to structure this over a 20-year term. Net effective interest rate based on recent market conditions is about 3.2%. We're expecting debt service payments of about $91,000 to $92,000 per year based on interest rates presently available in the marketplace. We are recommending a competitive sale of bonds, meaning we prepare an offering document, we distribute that to approximately 25 underwriters. Underwriters are folks that purchase municipal bonds and resell those to investors. And they would have an opportunity to bid on the purchase of these bonds, on our bid date, which is May 13th. So we prepare an offering document. We do recommend purchasing a credit rating from Standard & Poor's, so we'd go through a rating process, which your staff really likes. And ultimately, we'd have the ability to sell these competitively and receive bids. We'd present those bids to you for award on May 13th, and we'd close on or about May 28th. That credit rating is worthwhile. You do have a good credit rating in place. Standard & Poor's likes you as a community. That credit rating that we purchased from Standard & Poor's will buy us 0.5 to 0.75% over not purchasing a credit rating. And so while that credit rating costs about $9,500, it will save us tens of thousands of dollars in interest over the life of this bond issue. So we do recommend acquiring that credit rating as part of this process, and that's specifically why. If we didn't have to go through that pain, we wouldn't, but it saves us a lot of money, so it's worthwhile. We're pledging ultimately to levy a tax for the entire amount. We're only calling the principal portion abatement levy, but to be clear, the entire amount of debt service, about $92,000 a year, will be a new tax levy that will be implemented for 2020 in order to pay off these bonds. We can prepay as of February 1st or refinance February 1st of 2026. As I mentioned, there are ways to cancel the abatement levy if we receive additional donations or contributions for the project. Resolution in your packet authorizes us to prepare the offering documents associated with a competitive sale and initiate that process and contact Standard & Poor's to arrange for a credit rating. Again, interest rate isn't fixed until the day that we receive bids and present them to you for award, which is May 13th. More than happy to answer your questions on the structure and the material in your packet.
Okay. Questions? Steve?
Mr. Sweeney, you made a statement. You said that Standard & Poor's likes St. Peter?
Yes.
Why do they like us, or what do you mean by that?
Well, it was a bit jokingly, but Standard & Poor's in general assigns a very good credit rating for local units of government in Minnesota that pledge their ability to levy taxes to debt. And so that credit rating, when compared to what folks in commercial businesses can obtain for credit ratings, is better. And that's because we haven't had defaults on general obligation debt in the state of Minnesota, as far as we know, forever. Ultimately, it's a sound pledge that can be enforced even if folks don't make payments. The county auditor can be compelled to make that levy against your taxpayers. And because it's such a sound pledge, they assign us a good credit rating, and that gets us a much lower interest rate than other folks are able to obtain in the marketplace.
There are, if I can, there are two primary credit rating agencies or entities in the United States, S&P, Standard & Poor's, and Moody's. The Standard & Poor's methodology favors communities like ours, and the Moody's probably does not favor as much. And so that's kind of the comparative analysis.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else? Roger?
Seems like we get the credit ratings regularly.
Yeah.
When was our last one, and how come we can't use that?
That one was specifically only for your electric fund.
And we weren't actually purchasing a credit rating
Yeah.
at that time. They
Those
actually
review.
do surveillance at least every other year and sometimes annually. So when we had a surveillance call from Moody's on your electric utility. We did not pay for them to do that. They simply do that as a service to the folks that purchase your bonds, and they provide them with updated information on how you're doing ultimately financially. It's a financial analysis to gauge your creditworthiness on an ongoing basis. So last time we purchased a credit rating was when we did a competitive sale. I believe it was on a water project a year and a half to 2 years ago. We have done more of your electric utility debt and some other debts without credit ratings, simply because we found good markets for being able to sell those bonds that are not general obligation bonds. We're not pledging our ability to levy taxes on your electric utility in particular because we can't by statute. And so they are rated lower. And so we have had the opportunity to not purchase a credit rating for your electric utility and still receive a fair amount of benefit because, again, investors have liked this community and they understand that you have solid customers in your electric utility, institutional customers that pay their bills. So
I think our approach and Shannon's approach to this is that if we believe there's a financial benefit to purchase it, we do. If we don't clearly see that, we probably don't.
that's correct.
Any other questions?
If I can mention one other thing, without you issuing debt at some point with this, your general fund would be tapped for the funding here. And so as you know, you got a little bit over $3 million in general fund, and as you know, within your other enterprise funds, you skinny those up a little bit, skinny those up a little bit. And so that's a consideration in whether you issue debt or don't issue debt. From a staff perspective, we've talked about your reserves and what they go for and how they work. And so we believe that this is the most efficient, the most cost-efficient way to fund the project.
Shannon, Jerry asked earlier what you anticipated for interest rate. You said 3.2?
3.2% is what we projected at this point. I think that's a hair conservative.
Is that half to three-quarter that we would potentially gain from the Standard & Poor's? Is that reflected in that, or is that 3.2
Correct.
minus the?
No.
Okay.
That's already reflecting a credit rating.
Okay.
So
All right. Okay. Any other questions? Not the resolution providing for the competitive negotiated sale of $1,350,000 general obligation tax abatement bonds appears on page 31. Is there a motion for approval?
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
Any other questions or comments? Roger?
Thinking out loud, you know, we have this that's going to hit our taxpayers, and we're also talking about the fire station. You know, are we asking too much between the two? Is kind of where my mind's going.
Well, to me, the fire station, we're still a ways down the road from that. I mean, it's not going to happen tomorrow. You know, this we're talking for 2019. You know, by the time everything gets, you know, we may be 2020 and beyond on the fire station if we get to that point. I don't know, Todd, you have anything else to?
I think, you know, we've talked on many occasions, whether it's workshop or goal-setting sessions, what your course is. Generally, over the last dozen years or so, you have retired more debt than you've incurred overall for the city, whether it's a general fund and enterprise funds overall. You have projects that you want to undertake and needs that you have, and so we try and prioritize those in a way that makes the most sense. In relation to the fire hall, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. A final budget hasn't been set. You've talked about using sales tax, asking to put a sales tax in place to help fund a portion of that. And so I think, at least from my perspective, we try and work systematically, methodically through the processes and make it go. That's what we try and do.
Yeah, the sales tax, Roger, could potentially, maybe you weren't part of the conversation this last, could potentially add almost $300,000 that we could use for paying debt service on that, which is, if we're looking at $90,000 here for $1.35 million, you know, we're potentially looking at 3 times that, so we're at, you know, almost $4 million there, or a little over $4 million. So that was part of that, but it still has the word tax on it, but it's distributed a little bit differently than regular property tax would be. So
It is real. These are real dollars.
yeah.
Yep.
There's no doubt about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Johnson.
Nay.
Councilmember Garland.
Aye.
Mayor Zimmer.
Aye.
Councilmember Kwame.
Aye.
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
Aye.
Councilmember Graham.
Aye.
Councilmember Paris.
Aye.
Resolution is approved with 1 nay. Thank you, Shannon. Appreciate all your work. Next up, we have the 2019-2020 Environmental Services Budget. And Sally.
Mr. Mayor and City Council, I'm here, as Mayor stated, to present the 2019-2020 Environmental Services Budget and a rate-setting resolution. The memo starts on page 39 of the packet, and the resolutions are on page 48 and 49. Services included in this budget are refuse and recycling collection throughout the community, the operation of the yard waste drop-off site, the operation of a compost site, curbside yard waste and leaf pickup, Christmas tree pickup, maintenance of the city's urban forest, tree removal, planting, replacement program in the boulevards of trees, in the parks and in other public areas. We have added emerald ash borer. That's becoming more and more prevalent in Minnesota. So when we did the general fund budget, it was decided to move $50,000 a year for 19 and for 20 into the environmental services budget. We believe that this is the right place for it. This is where our forester is, and that's where it belongs. So that's why we moved it there. We have the maintenance of the downtown medians and urns, and also the downtown flower baskets. The costs/expenditures for these services for 2019 are projected to be $915,288, and for 2020 is $952,697. Revenues for these services are are charged to customers in 3 different areas on your monthly bill. We have garbage, and that's in 3, a volume-based, a 60-gallon and a 90-gallon. Recycling, that's charged to everybody. And then there's an environmental services fee on your bill. Note there's not been a rate increase on this revenue since 2013. But your costs or your expenses for garbage and recycling and operating costs continue to increase year over year. There's increase to the LJP's wages, insurance, and cost of materials, same as it is for us in the city. So costs have continued to increase. Of this budget, garbage and recycling, the LJP and Minnesota Waste Processing pickup is 54% of our budget. And then environmental services is the other 46% of the budget. And that's our employees in town taking care of what's going on in the town. So that's what makes that up. LJP did implement another rate increase on March 1st per the contract at 2.45% or 16 cents per household. And then disposal rates have continued to increase since 2013. And we're up right now to $91.31 a ton to have Minnesota Waste Process dispose of our things. We were hoping that through recycling that the poundage would go down. It has not. So there's still education and the rest. We are looking at putting in food waste composting. That's coming. But that's going to be on a smaller scale, people taking it. But we're hoping if it catches on that it will slowly reduce the tonnage. But we're not sure how many will participate and what that's going to do. So we're proposing the following increases for garbage and recycling effective July 1st, 2019. The chart is on page 38 of the packet. We're proposing volume-based to go for garbage and recycling from $6.32 per month up to $6.68, or a 36-cent a month monthly increase to those customers. 60-gallon, we're going from $11.80 a month up to $12.59, a 79-cent increase. And for 90-gallon, we're going from $14.53 up to $15.53, a dollar increase per household. As I said, Emerald Ash Board is driving $50,000 in the environmental services budget per year. We also have a capital request in 2019 of $70,000 for the replacement of our leaf vacuum. It's a 2001 leaf vacuum. This is used heavily in the fall as they go around picking up leaves and sucking up all the leaves from the community. During the fall of 2018, the leaf vacuum needed many repairs, which impacts the ability to get through the town in that time frame, from when the leaves drop to when the snow drops. So it was very weather dependent, and we were nip and tuck if we were going to get done this year. We did, but there was a lot of work to be done. 2020 capital needs, we're looking for a used GMC top kick truck for $27,000. We're looking to replace the 1993 Ford bucket truck with a boom to help our foresters get out and do the trees. And then we're paving down on the Julian Street on the brush drop-off. Total cost will be $48,000, but we're going to do a third each year starting in 2020. The tree and brush site is used heavily down on Julian Street. You know, if you can't get your leaves or your grass clippings to the curb in time when they're going to pick it up, a lot of people, you can go down and drop those off anytime in that area. As usual, the approval of these larger items will be brought to the City Council per the budget and per the purchasing policy. Due to these increased costs, we're looking at increasing our environmental service charge also. A detached single-family business will go from $8.63 up to $11.43, or $2.80 a month. Multi-unit apartment building, 5 and under, will increase from $2.16 per unit up to $2.86 per unit, or 70 cents per unit. Multi-units over 5 will go from $21.58 to $28.58, a $7 a month increase. Industrial will go from $25.89 up to $34.29, $8.40 increase. And others, we have a couple other, or some other categories, goes from $28.77 a month to $38.07, or $9.30. On page 39 of the packet, the total impact to our volume-based customers, which is our largest category of people that we can charge in the community. The volume-based will go from $14.95 a month to $18.11, a $3.16 increase, or an annual increase of $27.92. That will be for 2020. In 2019, it'll be half of that, because we're going to start this on July 1st. So it's going to be 6 months in 19 and 12 months in 20. 60-gallon will go from $20.43 up to $24.02, or a $3.59 increase, or $43.08. and our 90-gallon will go from $23.16 to $26.96, $3.80, or $45.60. Just so you have a magnitude, right now, based on where we're at, volume-based, we have about 108 customers. So annually, the increase per month will be about $136.
Well, would you clarify that? We have 108 customers where?
In the volume base,
Okay, all right.
okay?
So the
Yeah, gotcha.
The bags and that, the
I
cheaper
didn't
rate?
I didn't hear the volume base, I'm
Yep.
sorry.
And then the 60-gallon, we have 2,040 customers. So that's our biggest portion of this. And then the 90 is about 802 customers that use that.
Okay,
Right now, the refuse funds has no debt obligations, so we're pretty lean there. We do allow vacationers and snowbirds to stop garbage, so if they leave in November and come back now, we do let them get rid of their garbage charge, but we do not let them get rid of the environmental services charges. So we charge them even when they're gone. The balance, the fund balance, after the proposed rate increase for environmental services will be, at the end of 19, will be $14,829 and $4,216 at the end of 2020. The little decrease there, even though we've increased it for a full year, is due to we're going from, the capital expenditures are increasing year over year. So that's what's driving it. Again, these are proposed for July 1st, 2019. We will look at rates again when we do the next budget, and see where we're at for 21 and 22, depending upon where our fund balance goes and what cost of services increase. And as I said, as we're starting to implement food waste composting, hopefully tonnage will go down and maybe we'll see some savings there. It'll catch on and we'll be able to do some more things. So the resolution to approve the environmental service budget is on page 48. For 2019, the amount of expenditures again is $915,288. The 2020 budget amount is $952,697. And it'll give us a working plan, and as I said, if there's large purchases or projects, we'll come back before you asking for approval before we spend that money.
okay. Questions for Sally? Roger?
Hi.
Hi.
We call out how much, trash costs per ton, right? 91.31. Does recycling cost us to get rid of?
Yes, that's both.
So that's both? Okay.
Well, just to be clear, the tonnage that we're calling out here is the waste that goes through Minnesota Waste Processing.
Right.
We are not charged on a per ton basis for recycling materials, but we are charged for the pickup. So the vehicle that goes around and takes it.
That's an LJP.
That's correct. So that's the primary cost, that's a driver there. We do once in a while have some additional costs where a load of recycling gets rejected for whatever reason, but those are pretty far and few between.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's just within the LJP rate?
Right.
For
We
recycling?
do measure and do have data that we've shared with you relative to how much waste tonnage we have and how much recycling tonnage we have. As Sally said at the very beginning, we've seen our waste tonnage continue to go up, even as our recycling tonnage has stayed pretty steady. And I mentioned this to lots of groups, so let me mention it here because I think it's very important. Especially on the recycling side, it's very difficult to take numbers that are historical past 3 to 5 years. And I'll give you an example why that is. Many of you probably received 5 years ago a newspaper every morning, or maybe once a week from the St. Peter Herald. Many of us now don't. We still get that, but we get it electronically. And so where you might have put that paper into the recycling, that added to the recycling tonnage, now because of a change in our lives and how we operate or lifestyles, a lot of those things that used to be able to go into the recycling tonnage, well, they just aren't around anymore. It's not that they go to garbage. And so there's been a net change in the overall waste, as an example, because of newspaper and changes in habits related to newspaper. So I guess what I'm saying related to recycling is that we got to be very careful kind of how we look at those numbers, but certainly garbage tipping costs and the amount of tonnage that we have continued to go up. Again, the tonnage cost per ton and the amount per household has continued to go up.
Right. Okay. And You mentioned snowbirds. How many do we have that stop their trash service? Do we know?
I don't know off the top of my head, we can go back and look.
Is it very many? I mean,
Maybe 30 to 40
Okay,
right
so
now
it's
that come,
not-
it's
not
not
a
huge.
It's not in the
It's
hundreds.
not huge, it's not
Okay.
hundreds, no,
Yeah.
no.
all right. Okay.
Anyone else? Steve?
On page 38, there's a reference that in 2016, it was 118 pounds. Is that a yearly total, or?
That's,
Yeah.
that's the average per month
Yeah, per
across the
month.
year, annualized monthly average.
Okay.
That's
All right.
just of the refuse, not the
Just of the
recycling.
refuse.
Right, yeah.
Yep.
I understand. that.
So what you
Okay.
put in your black covered Kirby, not the green and yellow
Right,
one.
well, I understand that.
Okay.
Okay.
Anyone else? When we were presented with this recycling every week by LJP, you know, we were told that we would see, hopefully see, which we haven't, a 29% increase based off what other communities have done of recycling. And that isn't coming to fruition. And my point kind of back then was they extended the contract with really no basis other than promising this would happen. And it hasn't happened. And still, and I don't know, Susie knows more probably about this than I do, but I don't know what the environmental impact is of having that extra truck running around town every week. But that has an environmental impact too. So have we really gained anything, you know, by this, besides convenience, you know, for a few people? So that's just a point, I guess, that in the future, you know, when we get promised something or potentially promised it, it's, you know, I think we need to investigate a little bit more and something like that. Susie?
Just one or two comments about the environmental impact. One of the considerations is how quickly the truck fills up and thus has to go back to Mankato. So if people are recycling the same amount, but dividing it over half each week rather than all of it in one, presumably the truck is going to take longer to fill up and thus is hitting more households in town before it makes a trip back to Mankato or to its final destination. And so there are some potentials for efficiency in those sorts of ways. I don't have those numbers as far as how far the truck drives before it fills or any of those sorts of details, but that is a component into those numbers. As Todd said, it's not as simple as measuring the amount of trash waste and the amount of recycling, because there are variables, obviously, in both of those things. If we're getting the same amount of recyclables as we used to, and we're seeing the amount of trash go up, that's telling us that people are just using more materials overall, which I would tend to believe to be the case. So I don't necessarily think that there's evidence that people are recycling less or that they haven't increased the amount of material they move into their recycling containers. And then back to this the idea of equating things as far as the fuel costs and the environmental impact of those vehicles. I think it's very important to include those in this kind of calculation, but I think that it would be unfair to only calculate those in regards to the recycling trucks and not in regards to all of the other vehicles that we utilize. And so if we're concerned about the emissions that our vehicles are creating, then I think we ought to calculate that across all the vehicles that we use in town, and that should be a part of our regular conversations, which I'm absolutely in favor of. But I don't think that just because a recycling truck has some sort of goal that is in one way related to environmental protection, I don't think that only those recycling trucks should be held accountable for their emissions. And we should have that conversation about everything from fire trucks to lawnmowers, and it would be a good thing for the city to compare when we're making purchases and signing contracts.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I specifically on this, they said that it would increase on an average of 29%. that hasn't happened. You know, no matter what other factors are involved, they were using the same type of situation from, and that has, I mean, we haven't even come close to having that. And that's why I'm just specifically looking at the environmental impact of that, because I was hoping this 29% increase would offset that usage.
Right.
So we haven't, to me, we haven't really, except for the convenience for some people, we haven't really gained a whole lot. We maybe have even taken a step backward. So anyway, any other comments or questions? The 2019-2020 Environmental Services Fund budget appears on page 48. Is there a motion for approval?
So
So
moved.
moved, Mr. Second.
Any other questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Carlin.
Aye.
Mayor Zeman.
Aye.
Councilmember Quinn.
Aye.
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
Aye.
Councilmember Graham.
Aye.
Councilmember Paris.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Resolution is approved. Next up, related to this, we have the resolution adopting the 2019 Environmental Services Rate Schedule, which appears on pages 49 and 50. Is there a motion for approval?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments on this? Call the roll, please, Barb.
Mayor Zeman.
Aye.
Councilmember Quinn.
Aye.
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
Aye.
Councilmember Graham.
Aye.
Councilmember Paris.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Councilmember Carlin.
Aye.
Resolution is approved.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sally.
Thank you.
Next up, we have a taxi cab license application. Mr. Pratt.
Application from BEC Enterprises doing business as Blue Earth Taxi. The background check has been completed, and we found nothing to prohibit the issuance of the license. The license would be effective here on the 6th of April and run through the end of the year. All of your taxi cab licenses run.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry, 9th. They run through the end of the year for all of your taxi cab licenses.
Questions? The resolution approving the taxi cab license application appears on page 52. Is there a motion for approval?
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
Questions now? Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Quinn.
Aye.
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
Aye.
Councilmember Graham.
Aye.
Councilmember Paris.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Councilmember Carlin.
Aye.
Mayor Zeman.
Aye. Resolution is approved. Next up, we have a Department of Natural Resources outdoor grant application, and Mr. Moulton.
Mayor Zeman and City Council, staff is here tonight to ask you to authorize us to complete the application for DNR Outdoor Recreation Grant. You guys are probably familiar with this grant process. This is what we've been using at Hallett's Pond in previous years that will be completed this year. And what we'd like to do is use a similar process going forward. Your Parks Master Plan identifies about $280,000 worth of improvements to the park structures at Veterans Park there, adjacent to the swimming pool. Our ultimate goal would be that if we were lucky to receive the grant, we would have 50% of this funding paid for. The 50% that we'd be responsible for would come from two sources. You have authorized $100,000 to be placed in the parks budgets for future years for capital improvements that replaces the payment from the community center. So that's going to roll over back into the parks. And the other $40,000 would come from the parks budget, and we would make that work as the project goes on. This application, they would make a decision in June of 2019. We could start with some of the process in late fall. From that process, usually you're not too successful the first time that you make application, but we want to get our name out there with our project out there so they can look at it a little while. If we are fortunate enough, we want to be ready to go. We have a resolution on page 55 and 56, and I would be available for questions.
Questions, Steve?
So if I want to see what you're proposing, would I look at the parks plan that was put together several years back? Okay, it would be in there.
It would be
then.
in there.
Okay.
It's not itemized as well, but I do have that information as far as It really relates to the playground structures and ground surface improvements. As you guys know, we have a lot of youth there. We have a larger population of the, what I would call ages 6 and under, without adequate fall protection. What we'd like to do is improve those areas, so kids that are going to the wading pool and the younger kids that are with their parents down there have a decent playground to play on there. The biggest portion of our improvements is really the fall protection.
Okay. There was another question that I had, Pete. I read it someplace, and I don't remember where I read it now, but there was the word that kind of sparked my eye. You wanted to make it accessible.
Yep.
And what do you mean by that? Are you talking
We
about?
want to improve, I can't tell you that everything is 100% ADA compliant, but right now it is far from that, especially with the P-rock as far as the base material. We want to put a surface in there so that kids that have handicaps or have access issues can easily get to the playground equipment.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Oh, one other final statement. Visitors that come and visit me and we walk around town, they have always been impressed with how well our city looks. And I have to thank you for that.
Yep. We got a
And all the
tremendous park
staff
crew.
that you work
Yep.
with. Thank you.
Ed?
What do they use for a base now? What do they recommend?
There's a variety of different surfaces. So we would look at, there's actually a couple of new surfaces that are out there now, but where we like on the smaller kids is the rubberized protection, the ground protection.
It's still in pieces. I mean, it's
That's what I
not
was gonna say.
solid.
Well, there's a variety of options there. You can get it poured, you can get it in pieces.
Okay.
There's sections you can put in there. There's a new wood fiber now that you put down and then you spray a material over it and it acts more spongy. So technology's improving every year with different varieties there.
Okay. Susie?
And so if we were looking at some sort of relatively flat surface, whether they're rubber tiles or a poured rubber surface, I always like to point out the multiple benefits to multiple individuals. This would be good for people with mobility challenges. This would be good for wheelchairs. It's also good for all the parents who have a toddler on the playground and also another one in a stroller, because they would be able to bring the stroller closer to their kids instead of parking on the edge of the gravel. And so there are multiple benefits to making things more accessible for all.
Mr. Mayor,
Roger?
if we're not going to use the poured, right, and I've seen these up in the cities at parks, where you could roll across them real easy, and they're still, soft.
Right.
If we're not going to use that kind, I mean, this is $280,000.
Yep.
I'm having a lot of trouble imagining what playgrounds cost $280,000, especially if we're going to
All of
have, well, if we're going to have,
Yeah.
pieces of rubber, versus, a nice surface that everybody can get to.
Right. Our initial goal is to really separate the two play structures. We'll bring that back to the Parks Board and talk about some options of what we can do there. If we stay with the smaller equipment all in one spot against merging it with the larger equipment where the larger kids are, we might be able to get by with a higher end ground surface material.
But that's only on the small.
Right.
So older kids are out of luck.
Well, no, they still get a good surface. It's just that the smaller kids are more suspect to falling, and so you're trying to protect on a different level there.
Remember, there are
I'm
two
thinking for
playgrounds there.
accessible.
There's the
Yeah.
playground south of the pool and then west of the pool.
Right.
So there's two of them there.
Right. And that's what this
Right.
funds are intended to cover.
Right, and we'd look at that in conjunction with Damon Farber, our parks consultant, and the Parks Board to come up with a plan for that.
Anyone else? I just have one question, Pete. Can you explain to people that are over 60 how we survived growing up?
I cannot.
That's why we have memory.
Anyway. The resolution authorizing submission of application for the Department of Natural Resources Outdoor Recreation Grant Program appears on pages 55 and 56. Is there a motion for approval?
Move the resolution, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
Any more questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Pfeiffer?
Aye.
Councilmember Grahams?
Aye.
Councilmember Paris?
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson?
Aye.
Councilmember Carlin?
Aye.
Mayor Zeman?
Aye.
Councilmember Paul?
Aye.
Resolution is approved. That concludes our new business. Thank you, Pete. Next up, we have reports, and the only thing I have tonight is a proclamation for Arbor Day and Arbor Month, and it says, whereas Minnesota's forest treasures were a significant attraction to early settlers because of their usefulness and the beautiful environment they protected. And whereas trees are an increasingly vital resource in Minnesota today, enriching our lives by purifying air and water, helping conserve soil and energy, serving as recreational settings, providing habitat for wildlife of all kinds, and making our cities more livable. And whereas Arbor Day was founded on April 10th, 1872 by J. Sterling Morton at Nebraska City, Nebraska. And whereas in 1876, Minnesota became the 4th state to adopt Arbor Day. And whereas the citizens of St. Peter have proudly participated in celebration of Arbor Day and Arbor Month for many years. Now therefore I, Charles Zeman, Mayor of the City of St. Peter, Minnesota, do hereby proclaim April 26, 2019 as Arbor Day and May 2019 as Arbor Month in the city, and encourage citizens to participate in tree planting activities at their homes and businesses as the city plants trees in the Community Spirit Park during the month of May, in witness thereof. And that's all I have, Todd.
Mayor members, I have 3 or 4 items that I'd just like to cover quickly. First of all, just an update on flooding. As you know, the river's starting to go down, but we will have some substantial cleanup in the area of the disc golf course, and some of you may have noticed that a portion of the road in the mill pond is closed. Pete's crew is pumping water out of that area. But if you can't tell, the mill pond is kind of like a fishbowl. And so when the water gets in there, it needs a little bit of help sometimes to get out, so that facility can be used sooner rather than later. And so wanted to mention that as an update. I also want to give you an update on the Minnesota Square Pavilion project. As some of you may have noted today, fencing started to go up, and demolition could start as early as tomorrow. So I want you to be aware of that and know that that is going on. The last one that I have to mention is severe weather awareness is coming up here, and Thursday is a big day for that. And as some of you may recall, generally there's 2 statewide tornado drills, and those are still planned for Thursday the 11th, one at 1:45 and one at 6:45, and so outdoor sirens would sound. However, there has been some discussion both at the state level and the local level, if we are having thunder snow, anyway, if we have very, very inclement weather, it is possible that we will not be sounding those sirens, either through a decision at the state level or through a decision locally, so that there's not confusion on people's parts what's going on. But regardless of how that works, we really want to encourage folks to talk with their families, take time to plan in the event of a tornado warning. Many of you were here during the tornado and know what can happen. And so it is really worth a few minutes of your time to think about what you would do in the event the sirens went off in the tornado warning, and where would you go and where would your family go. So whether we sound sirens or not as a test of that emergency system, as an opportunity for you all to practice, we'd really encourage you to talk about it and maybe practice without us. Have one of your younger kids pretend to be the siren and then go to your safe spot. So we would really encourage that for folks within our community. Mayor members, that's all I have for tonight.
All right. Anyone else? Anything to add? Steve?
This may seem like a silly question, but you know, on Hyalet's Pond, there's a pipe that's constantly discharging water on the west end. Where's that water coming from?
That water comes from the stormwater detention basin, which is just upstream. So it's not even a softball throw from Hallett's Pond. And so it only discharges when that pond is filled to a certain level. And as you know, we've had a very, very wet spring, whether it's snow or rain and other activities. And so Hallett's Pond is that discharge point.
Okay, I used the wrong. The mill pond, there's a pipe on the west end that's water's coming out of all of that.
Yeah, artesian
It
well.
is, okay.
Yes, it is.
All right, okay.
Yep.
So in other words, I could fill my water jugs up there,
It tastes very irony.
okay? All right.
That's ironic.
That's drinking water in Minnesota.
I know that.
Exactly.
Well,
Change of pace.
anyone else have anything to add? If not, is there a motion to adjourn?
So move, Mr. Mayor.
Second?
All in favor of adjournment, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned.
Hey, members, I want to mention you should have got this in the mail. The time to early reserve is running out end of the month for League of Minnesota Cities Conference in Duluth. I believe Steve is going, I'm going, but if you're interested in going,
Can't do it.
now is the time.
Yeah, we got it. I got it.